There is another point which is connected to this accusation of committing the naturalistic fallacy. Peterson is using the term of meta-reality and metaphysics. And he's accusing Sam Harris of not being explicit about his metaphysics. I think he's partly right in that. If you take metaphysics to be the most foundational concepts for your worldview, this is concepts like, what do you take causation to actually mean? What do you mean by the word causation? What do you mean by the word determinism? What do you mean by the word free will, and so forth? Peterson is accusing Sam Harris of not being explicit about these foundational concepts and smuggling in some metaphysical concepts that he's taking from Christianity. Now, of course, I don't think it's particularly something that is only to be found in Christianity. I think Christianity itself is taking these foundational concepts from human history, obviously, because you can find the same conceptual frames in other cultures. Or if you look at the work of Jonathan Haidt, what he's been working out is that there are specific distinctions that are on a subconscious, it's a bad word, that's not the right to use, but they're on a level which is not, which you're not purely aware of. And these distinctions are actually informing your moral decisions. These basic moral intuitions are informing your moral decisions. And it could be argued that it is those narratives that are actually covering most of these foundational moral intuitions that are most successful. So Christianity is covering a few of these moral intuitions. So this was a factor why it could become so successful. It was not just forced upon people, even though it was, of course, forced upon people. I mean, people didn't really have a choice, did they? I mean, it's not like they had 10 metaphysical systems to choose from and they chose Christianity and Christianity won. That didn't really happen. But still, it wouldn't have gotten that big if it wasn't also covering a lot of reality and a lot of what it's like to be human. So certainly it covers some of these moral intuitions. But it's not like Christianity is specifically responsible for these moral intuitions. At least I think this is the argument that, or the path of argument which Sam Harris might take. These moral intuitions are something that is universal to all conscious creatures. But Peterson is right that Sam Harris is not explicit about what, for example, he means by determinism, or what is it that Sam Harris specifically means by free will. Peterson is a bit more detailed, but the really full, fleshed-out version of a metaphysics I find in integral theory, where you have all the basic conceptions covered, where you have a conception of determinism which is compatible with the conception of free will, where you have a conception of free will which is not just a given, but free will is something you have to grow into. You have to develop your free will. You have to grow into subjecthood. Subjecthood is not something that you get for free. Subjecthood is something you have to work for. You have to become more free in the course of your life by paying attention, by developing your ability to take perspectives, and by using attention in general. So it's not as if both thinkers were particularly explicit on their metaphysics. So, for example, I'm not sure how natural science, for example, is possible on Jordan Peterson's metaphysics. How is it possible to know about the world? How is science making sense of the world that is different from, for example, a hermeneutic approach to the world? Sam, by the way, also doesn't really explain how is it possible to know. How is it possible to be in touch with reality? Wilber is, on the other hand, very explicit. He's very explicit that knowledge is a genetic process. This is to say, knowledge is not a strictly propositional form. You're not just right or wrong about something, but there is degrees of being right. This is even an animal has a form of knowledge, of acquaintance with its environment that is partly right, where it's not only just making up fictions about reality that don't ever correspond to reality, because we know that a dog has a certainly more limited perspective on reality than even we have. But a dog is indeed sensing its environment. It is in touch with its environment on some specific level. And so are past scientific theories. They don't turn simply wrong once a new scientific theory is popping up, but they are being relativized by newer theories. They are always relatively true. So are the models that we teach to children. I mean, the atom model that we teach to children has nothing to do with actual atomic behavior, and yet it has something to do. It is a metaphor that at some level is telling you something that is relatively true. So this kind of explicit genetic account, as we find it in Wilbur, you won't find in either Peterson and Sam Harris. So I think they could both do a better job on this. It would help a lot, and it would help a lot of building, how should I say, of clarifying a lot of confusions, and both of them could put a lot of more work in being more explicit about how they think, for example, consciousness specifically relates to reality. I mean, the few hints that Jordan Peterson gave us about the observer and the observed being related are, from an integral perspective, highly problematic, because he's using two different definitions of the observer, namely in systems theory or in the physical sciences, in physics, sorry. The observer is basically a system. It has nothing to do with consciousness. It's an apparatus. The observer in phenomenology, on the other hand, is the I observing and witnessing the single events within consciousnness. But both don't have anything in common, except, of course, being the same term. And Peterson seems to imply that there is something that the observer within the phenomenological perspective can tell us something about the observed as a physical reality, which is, I think is very dubious, to say the very least. I think it's problematic and one of the pre-post fallacies which Wilbur has been talking about.